to have a conversation. And I know Eileen was here. She'll be back. Oh, here she comes. Here she comes. So we thought it would be wonderful to have some different folks with different backgrounds to share on some questions around this theme of healing relationships within our sacred world. And we are going to have a short time for questions at the end. And in the benches, there are some cards, a few cards. You can write questions on those. And there'll be a couple of board members who will be picking up those cards. I think Ann and Ruth, if you could do that at some point, let me know when. And so just share those things if you want to. So I also have to say that Laura Passes, who is a friend of IPL, and just a lovely, amazing environmental journalist, has said yes to this enthusiastically months ago, and she has COVID. And it's not a good case of COVID, it sounds like. So she is not well. So we want to send some healing to her. So I have to say, Clara Sims, who is working with Interfaith Power and Light and also with First Congregational Church, has decided, she said she would step in and moderate our panel. She'll do an excellent job. She just graduated from Yale with her Master's of Divinity. And she worked with IPL when she was in college a few years ago, and in between time, it's just lovely to have her. So she'll be engaging our panelists in conversation, and I just want to mention who they are. We have Bishop Michael Hunn, who is the Bishop of the Episcopal Church of the Diocese of Rio Grande, which includes New Mexico and West Texas. And not only does he do that, but he's also a permaculturist, very concerned, committed to Mother Earth, and he's been in ordained ministry for several decades. And he also has experience in nonviolence and nonviolent communication, which we really have a lot of need for in our world right now as well. And I have to say, I was very moved when I went to the Episcopal Diocesan Convention a year ago, and his call to all the Episcopals there to really address climate change, and even in the midst of the Permian Basin. I was very moved by that call, so thank you for being with us. And then we have Ryan Tate, who is in the center here, and he is a young man who is finishing his divinity degree as well. It's wonderful to have all these young adults who are being learning and sharing their gifts in amazing ways, and with new theologies and new horizons for our earth, and is so needed. And he also is at First Congregational UCC. He's the director of Children, Youth, and Family Ministries. And he is a student, a musician, and he's an avid forager. So I'm sure we'll be talking about that a little bit. So and then we have Eileen O'Shaugnesssy, whom I've known for quite a few years, and I just appreciate her spirit and who she is so much. She comes from a Catholic, Irish background, but she's also a deep meditator, and she is finishing a doctorate, and she teaches at UNM and CNM, and she has her own music group called Eileen and the Twins, and they've toured around the United States, Canada, and Europe. She works for social justice, she lives for social justice, and she also began a grassroots group called Demand Nuclear Abolition. And so I just want to welcome you all, and please welcome them very warmly. We're so grateful that you're here.
Thank you, Joan, for that gracious introduction. To my own disappointment, as much as your own, I am not Laura Pastes. But we wish her a swift recovery, and I will do my best by your panelists. Before we dive in, just a few framing words for our conversation today. To everyone here, it is probably self-evident why we at IPL have been feeling the need for a conversation about healing relationships. And in light of world events in the last 2 weeks, I think that really lends a more piercing urgency to that conversation, including, I think, an urgency to find better ways to speak the human and the environment together, as David will so beautifully led us through this now. And at the same time, as there is such misunderstanding and
heart has been hurting, and just been glued to the news in Gaza and in Israel and Palestine. My background is Irish Catholic. I grew up in the Midwest, in Nebraska and in Minnesota, and I have many degrees in what I call the studies. So I have degrees in justice and peace studies, women's studies, American studies. And when I was an undergrad, I spent a semester in Northern Ireland studying what's known as the Troubles, which is a very Irish, understated way of talking about a very deep conflict. And one thing that I learned in that context is that that conflict is framed as a religious conflict, but it is not. It's about settler colonialism, it's about land, and that's important context for what's happening right now in Israel and Palestine. And when I was in Northern Ireland, there are murals everywhere of Irish solidarity with Palestine, and there's kind of this shared understanding of what it means to be occupied. So I guess I'm starting there because it's on my mind and heart, and there are many ways that we tear ourselves from the earth and from whatever source of divinity, however we want to name that. And I think those forms of violence, we have to look at them in the face. Where we are sitting right here is mere miles away from one of the largest stockpiles of nuclear weapons on the planet. And my work is really centered around bringing awareness to that issue here in New Mexico, where it began. And so the question was about spirituality, and I'm talking about a lot of things that are bringing up pain, but for me, we have to know the wound in order to know the medicine. And my background in terms of being Irish Catholic, I'll just say, I was very much inspired by the Plowshares movement when I learned about folks like the Berrigan Brothers and Dorothy Day, and people of faith and conscience who sort of couldn't disconnect their spirituality from the world that they lived in, from taking action. And so the Plowshares movement was about sometimes breaking into military bases and pouring their own blood on these weapons of death and destruction. And when I was a teenager and I learned about them, I was like, those are my people. It's like, I can get down with that form of spirituality. And that kind of led me on this path of trying to understand some of the roots of violence and the things that tear us from the earth and from one another. So I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. One of the ways that spirituality is incredibly important to my relationship with the land, I am a spiritualist, so the souls of the dead and the ancestors are very important to me. And within the land holds memories. And when you refuse to acknowledge those memories will manifest in the most violent and destructive of ways. And we are living embodiments of the land. And when we acknowledge those memories, when we give those memories that new bodies to live through us, it can give resolution to the pain that the land goes through. The work that I do is also very politically aligned, and I see what I do as a decolonization of our understanding of God and the greater force of this world. A lot of us see God and the land as far away things that we cannot touch and that we need help to access. But God lives within us. It lives in the land, it lives in the stars, and our ancestors, and the spirits who walk with us. So it's very important that by honoring the land and by honoring those who belong to the land, we respect everyone around us and ultimately we respect God.
Good evening, everybody. I believe that the practice of creation here is a spiritual practice, and it's rooted in coming out of that tradition, there are 2 points I'd like to make about how my spirituality is rooted in that tradition. The first is the phrase which comes out of our Holy Scriptures, that the earth belongs to God, for God made it. And there's profundity in that statement because many people who have been ancestors of mine, following the practice of Christianity, have interpreted the book of Genesis to mean that God gave human beings dominion over the earth, as in, almost like God gave us the thing to break it if we wanted to, which is not actually what the Hebrew words mean, nor is it, I should ask a rabbi about that, but there is rather a more profound understanding that God, the creator of all that is, has invited human beings onto the earth to be a force of reconciling healing and growth. The fact of the matter is that a human presence on a piece of ground can bring about greater abundance if we tend to care and notice. To me, that is about embracing the spiritual practice of humility, recognizing that we are always here on behalf of the Creator, and that we are welcomed into creation in such a way that we have responsibility to nurture and care, not to exploit and destroy. So for me, there is a long history in my tradition, in the Christian tradition, of colonial exploitation, extraction, and destruction, both of the earth and of cultures. The doctrine of discovery, for example, the theological justification for dominance, is not rooted in the faith that I practice. But I'm deeply aware as I walk around the world dressed like this, that I'm often assumed to be interested in domination, extraction, and colonial taking and owning. So part of my spiritual practice is to embody the faith as I have received it, which is that we are here to heal, to love our neighbor, to love God, and to love the earth. And part of that tradition, in fact, to me, the whole point of being a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ, is that we believe that Jesus Christ was the physical human incarnation and manifestation of the love that creates and sustains and nurtures the universe. When God came to be among us, we proclaim that God came among us as one who loves, one who heals, one who reconciles, one who stands opposed to the forces that sought to discriminate and put some above others. And so we see in Jesus Christ, the creator of the universe embodied in human form, who came not to colonize and conquest and overwhelm and destroy, but rather one who was born not only as a helpless infant, but one who was undocumented, poor, born out of wedlock, with no forces of protection or power in the world. And so for me, the practice of following my Lord Jesus Christ is a practice of daily practicing vulnerability and openness to compassion and love, and the practice of nonviolence, which manifests itself by caring for creation and working to heal and restore, particularly the brokenness that was caused by people who look like me and talk like me. I get started.
Thank you so much for each of your answers. If you want to respond, I have another question. Well, I appreciated particularly how you ended in uplifting the ways humans live in enhancing and life-giving ways of our environment, because I know that I find as a young adult so many narratives that humans only cause harm, and I think that is a very white settler colonial vision of humanity, and I'm excited that I think for more and more corners and push back. So you all have already started to touch on this question, but I wonder if you can offer it some specificity how do ancestors and the earth inform and guide you in the world? And let's start on that side.
I'll start with the ancestors, because that's the order that you asked it. And I've begun to share with you that for one who looks and walks like I do, my particular ancestors are problematic today. And part of my spiritual journey is to own the problematic reality of the Church of England and its colonial past and heritage. The Episcopal Church is part of the worldwide Anglican Communion. The Anglican Communion is the third largest group of Christians in the world after the Orthodox churches and the Roman Catholics. It's called the Anglican Communion because it is, Anglican means English. The Anglican Communion basically exists wherever the empire of the British Crown colonized across the world. So it's a vast network because the colonial effort on behalf of the British Crown was vast and global and worldwide. We here in the United States were the first ones to declare independence and push back and reject the Crown. And that ancestral relationship in my tradition has kind of two flavors to it. One is definitely the colonial presence, and there are histories of missionaries who went around the world in order to save souls and to export English culture and dominance across the world, and to enforce that with violence. There is also a strong element within my tradition that was the tradition that thought that the Holy Scriptures should be in the language and culture of the people. And as I've been blessed to travel around the world visiting Anglican churches throughout the world, I have seen in the language and culture of the people where it's not about dominance and oppression, but it is rather about coming alongside and saying, shall we look for God's presence together and express that in the music, language, and culture of the people. So for me, when I'm thinking about the ancestors, every day I'm trying to be really clear as a bishop that our job here in the Diocese of the Rio Grande is not to be the white church, not to be the English church, but to be a church that is deeply rooted in this land and deeply respectful of the people of this land. We come to be partners in care and love, not in cultural dominance, although that is a part of the ancestral tradition that I acknowledge. In terms of what that means for the earth, I'll speak a little bit about what that means for us in the Diocese of Rio Grande today. As was mentioned earlier, my diocese includes all of New Mexico and the far west part of Texas, El Paso, and going across the south of Texas towards Fort Stockton, Norfolk, etc. 40% of the U.S.-Mexico border is in our diocese, as is almost all of the permanent east. Our diocese is about half Republican, half Democrat. And we are all addicted to oil, as we are here in New Mexico, where our schools are funded by the taxes from the permanent basin. That is extracted, and the profits don't stay here very much, but the oil is extracted from it. And there is, of course, as you all know, a vast history of extraction here, whether it's uranium or oil or other forms of extraction. So my task as the bishop of the diocese is to try to find language and common ground in a diocese that's half Republican and half Democrat, to find ways of talking about care for the earth that don't immediately sound like partisan politics and escalating conflict. I am finding, as I work across the diocese, that there is a lot of care for the earth on both sides of the political divide, but that we need new language to talk about. Because much of the language that we hear is explicitly oppositional and designed to win votes and to win elections, or to tear down the other side even if we're not going to win. And in my opinion, the more energy we spend on conflicts such as that, the less time and energy we have, literally, to do the important work of healing the planet. And so that's our task.
I think that the way that the ancestors play a role in my spiritual path is that We must all live with our ancestors. Our ancestors' choices with everything that we do. Even in the houses that you occupy right now, you would be in a house if it weren't for how your parents raised you, the choices that they made, how their parents' parents, and so on and so forth. And it's those little immediate realities of how ancestry affects us that we can see tangibly. And what we must do is pull out the overarching scheme of ancestry. And in that, we must acknowledge the ancestral traumas that certain lineages have. In my tradition of spiritualism, there are so many manifestations of spiritualism, and none of them look the same, because spiritualism is centered on ancestral liberation. No one's ancestors are going to be the same. Everyone's ancestors are going to be different. When you go to Albuquerque, they have to find out you have to live. If you go to Tiwa, they have something school. And here, Hoodoo. And all of these different variants of spiritism and spiritualism, they all acknowledge, ultimately, indigeneity, regardless of if there are indigenous people in that setting. There's always an acknowledgement of the indigenous spirits out there who came before our occupation. And in that understanding of indigeneity, you give the land autonomy because you give it a face. You give it a face of the people who came before you. And when you constantly remind yourself of that face, when you constantly remind yourself, we currently, all of us are on Tiwa land. And when you remind yourself of the land that you are on, it allows you to, as we were talking about humility, to humble yourself and actually take care of the land that you're on. It's not even yours. If we're looking at the Bible, God says that we are stewards of the earth. You know what a steward is? It is a glorified butler. It is a butler. We are butlers of the earth for God. We're intended to take care of this earth. We are employees. We are guests. And it's important that we remember that. And in the way that I believe that we can best take care of our environment and how ancestry impacts how we take care of the environment, we need to look at the indigenous voices who are taking care of the land for ages before any of us even knew what the land was or what it was. There are so many people, a part of indigenous efforts, taking care of this land now, and they're being invaded by colonial forces who think they can do it better, who think you can take care of somebody who's been on land for thousands of years, and you've only been here 100 years. And there's this reliance upon a Eurocentric epistemology of thinking, oh, we have our science, and we have our material understanding of the world, and it far exceeds the primitive understanding that indigenous people live. This is so far from here, and so important. And when we are able to share space and share knowledge without that hierarchy, and acknowledging that we are all human beings, and also being able to admit that we do not know everything, that is what we best take care of the land by acknowledging that the land deserves to be in the rightful hands of its owners.
Thanks, Ryan. It's really powerful land acknowledgement. It's, what you're saying is so important, and we are on Tiwa land. I want to just really, Tiwa land, I want to lift that up for sure. So I mentioned that my ancestors came from Ireland, but before saying that, I am white on this land, and that's important to say because my ancestors came during the potato famine, which was a political genocide. It was not a crop, right? I mean, that was part of it, but the British government weaponized it against the Irish people. And in the mid-1800s, my ancestors came to this country as, refugees in a sense, after experiencing colonization in Ireland, but then they became part of the system of white supremacy here, which is a process that's really important to understand how that happens, because Jewish folks, Italian people, Irish people, at one point were distinct ethnicities, but then became folded into white supremacy by buying into it, by basically buying into these lies that you spoke of, Bishop, of hierarchy and power over. And if that's not spiritual death, I don't know what is. If that's not, doesn't create a spiritual vacuum, So that's why, for me, anti-racist work is spiritual work. It's really important. It's about uncovering humanity and fighting for humanity. So I do ancestry work not to sideline looking at whiteness, what it means to be white, and all of the unearned privilege and accumulation and padding that come with whiteness, but I do ancestry work in order to connect to what my actual roots are, because part of the spiritual vacuousness of whiteness is white people, we lose our culture. We lose connection with our own indigeneity. And so I've done some work to really dig and look and find who my ancestors were, and I'll just say, the ancestry database is out there. That's a whole other conversation about DNA and surveillance and all of that. And unfortunately, it reveals something that for white folks, there are registries, there are records and archives. And for a lot of people of color, that is not true, and that is a reflection of these violent legacies of colonialism, that white history, right? But I'll just say that this is my favorite thing to brag about. I'm related to an Irish pirate queen. her name is Grace O'Malley, or Granuel is the Irish name for her. And here, hold this for So I carry one of my ancestors with me. She was an amazing woman. Can I say badass in church? She was an amazing woman she was born in 1530. She was a contemporary of Queen Elizabeth and was alive at a very tumultuous time, which I find comfort in. Remembering that there have been many tumultuous times on planet Earth, and people have lived through the different versions of apocalypses across the planet, But during her time, Ireland, was basically a bunch of clans. She was on the west coast, a seafaring clan, and she became a sea captain and a pirate at a time when, women weren't necessarily doing that. She cut off her hair in order to, Granuel means short-haired one, because when she was young, she asked her father if he would teach her how to sail, and he said, no, your long hair will get caught in the sails, and so she cut off her hair. But anyway, there's many stories about her adventures, and she once sailed to meet with Queen Elizabeth and refused to bow to her, which could have gotten her killed. But I carry that ancestor with me, and I also carry the complex legacy of those who came here and, like I said, bought into white supremacy, fell asleep to their own, ancestral aliveness. So that's all, that complexity is within me, I'll just say, in the work of anti-racism. And then the question about the earth, just briefly say a few words about that. For me, my body is not separate from the earth. My body is the earth. One of my mentors is Dr. Joanna Macy. Some of you may know. She's 93 now, and she's an amazing eco-Buddhist philosopher. She's written many books, and she once interviewed this man, an activist, John C., who was involved in protecting the rainforest during environmental work. And she said, John, how do you not fall into despair? Like, your work is just a losing battle. And he said, well, Joanna, I don't see myself as defending the rainforest, as separate from the rainforest. He said, I am not John C. defending the rainforest. I am the rainforest recently come into consciousness defending itself. And for me, if we think of ourselves as the earth, as not separate from the larger body that is the earth, there's a lot of power and strength and rootedness there. And it makes me feel like we've had 4 billion years of preparation for this moment.
Right.
Wow, so much to cherish and reflect upon in your answers. I'm thinking today I was working on writing a sermon reflecting on some of these themes and my own ancestry as a white person here, and you all may have encountered the First Nations translation of the New Testament, in which they give beautifully descriptive place names and people names like Nazareth, the seed planter village, and Rome, with his people of iron. And what came to me in reflecting on America, in my positionality, is the rootless rulers. And I think there's so much wisdom in everything you shared and you connecting, both the harms and the healing possible in our ancestry. And another thing I noticed, kind of I think a subtext maybe of what you all shared, is the colonization of time. As we think about our ancestors, Joy Barjo writes that it is foolish to think that the past is the past. And I think that is something that we so often miss in our very Western, linear vision of time. I just wanted to lift that up. Our next question, I hope you all are writing some of yours down, is what do you feel is the most important calling you have at this moment? And how is it at the root of healing and root of balance? And I
think that at this moment, the most important calling I have is educator. It is helping people really get back to their own identity. Because when you live in a place where nobody knows who they are, they'll fall for anything. They'll fall for hatred. They'll fall for anything just to feel like they belong, because they don't really do belong anywhere. When you do have a foundation of self, and when you do have a foundation of where you come from, and understanding all of these things that can count to make a whole person, you cannot be so easily led to hatred. You cannot be so easily led to violence. And so I think the most healing thing that we can do as a collective, other than this unpack our race and hegemonic understandings of reality, is to know ourselves so that we can truly know others and begin to know others without fear that their enemies are going to be part of us. That's what's important to me.
The question of call in my tradition has a long history in which most often God whispers yearnings into the souls of human beings that they might go and do often things they're terrified of and take on work that is impossible. To go and speak to the rulers on behalf of those who are in a suicide mission. You may recall the story of Jonah, who was invited to go and call the entire city to repent of their sins, and he ran the other way, got swallowed by the whale, and delivered onto the shore of that very city. And when his mission was successful, he was so angry because he didn't want to save those oppressive people. He was so angry that he threw a hissy fit on the mountain up above the city, which had been spared because it actually did turn around. So for me, language of call is terrifying because it is always about walking into God's vision of the world, which is not safe because the world is not running the way God would have it run. The world is full of violence, and God is trying to call us to reduce the violence and to mend the brokenness. Violence is, in my definition, any time that power is used over another person. So violence is not just bloodshed or outward assault. It can happen passively. It can happen any time when I decide my needs will get met, and yours I don't care about whether they get met. So understanding violence in any of those situations where it's about my needs first, and you may or may not get what's left, that is violent. And it can happen in a conversation. It happens multiple times during the day. And the impact of violence when it happens to us is like static electricity. It charges our body with pain and hurt, which we need to discharge. And often when that violence builds up in our bodies, which we know is a biological reality and a spiritual truth, we seek to discharge that violence, often by perpetrating violence. And so the cycles continue down the generations, and they can bounce around the workplace or the neighborhood. They bounce around the internet all the time. And when we start, instead of trying to correct wounds by saying this one wins and that one doesn't, or this one is right and that one is wrong, anytime we put something in a box and put a label on that box, that is the use of violence to control. If we can start to see instead ways for us to express our pain and be vulnerable about that, then immediately our compassionate human hearts want to reach out to care. But it is so hard to learn the spiritual practice when I'm hurt, not to defend or counterattack, but instead when I'm hurt, to open myself, to be vulnerable and express that hurt in a way that is not an assault on you or a blame of you. But when we can create space where my vulnerable humanity can be seen, it is the most natural and obvious thing for you to try to help me care for. And so I see rooted in my tradition that part of my role is to help teach the practice of prayer and spirituality in such a way that we can be strong in our vulnerability instead of defending ourselves, hoarding resources, counterattacking in order to make sure that no one takes what I'm afraid they're going to take from me. It's a much more difficult than I would say holy thing to instead open our arms and our hearts to share what we have and to express our fears and vulnerabilities so that we might share what's together. Part of my role as a bishop is to live not in linear time, but in the cycles of the church year. When we go into our Sunday morning Holy Eucharist, there is no clock on it. People look at their watch when I'm preaching. But other than that, there is no clock. It's almost like baseball before the pitch clock, where if you're at a baseball game and you say, what time is it? The answer is, we're halfway through the fourth inning. When you're in church, what time is it? We're almost done with the sermon. And if we can learn to live in cyclical time, like the earth does, we can begin to slow down. And instead of trying to win, instead of trying to finish the argument, we can instead try to stay in relationship. So that, I think, is my goal.
I think that I have been thinking a lot about empathy at this particular, again, planetary moment. And the root of the word empathy is to suffer with. I mentioned the Plowshares movement. I am so moved by their ability to act on behalf of not only themselves, but future generations, people they may never know, out of concern for the violence that nuclear weapons can enact. So I think I'm curious about what allows us as human beings to take action on behalf of someone who I don't share that experience, someone whose identity is not, one that I inhabit, right? Just to say, being in a church is painful for me. As a member of the LGBTQ community, I have felt not welcome in church spaces at moments. And so that experience, though, has been a bridge for me to feel empathy for others who have not felt welcome. So that's one piece of information. I mean, I'm just thinking about that in terms of what's happening in, again, Israel, Palestine, and Gaza. It feels so far away, but I am just so aware of our peace. You know, we're sitting in this church, and it is connected to us because over $100 billion of our tax money is going to fund violence. So how do we sit with that dissonance? How do we sit with our own peace, our own ability to have these conversations without the raining of bombs upon our bodies, and have genuine empathy? You know, those are, I don't know if that's a call or a question, but that's just what I feel like I want to say.
Absolutely, I think that is a call, and I hear you saying that we can all find the rootedness from which we can build bridges of relationality. So for our final question, before we invite what you all might want to ask, you all share something essential about your vision of the earth. In a word, in a sentence, whatever. Again, I'll let you all decide this time.
Yeah. I think that was essential to my future is leaving room for multiple perspectives and still allowing people the room to grow within themselves in new perspectives and old ones as well.
For me, what is essential is the power of love. And what I mean by that is it's not the kind of Disneyland, my heart is jumping out of my chest kind of love, but a deep-seated appreciation for all of creation and all of humanity. An example of that is, it was mentioned earlier, I'm a horticulture gardener, and I spend a lot of time on my knees in the garden and in the orchard. Thanking God for all that God is doing around us all the time. If you leave things alone, God grows stuff. It takes a lot of work to control that growth. If you've never tried to, I don't know if you're thinking about mowing lawns or pruning trees or just kind of wrangling tomatoes at this time of year, God's growth is exponential. And I see that as an expression of love for all of creation. And when the cranes came back just a couple of weeks ago, I could hear the calls coming over the mountain as calls of love and welcome back, we're home. Even though they're moving from place to place. I think the more that we can spend time with the earth, giving thanks, and noticing the way God is always looking to provide with abundant generosity for us, that will awaken and quicken in us that kind of love and abundant generosity, not just for those who look like us or live in our neighborhoods, but especially for those who are coming from a different place. And the more we find the vulnerability in ourselves, the more we lead and speak and live out of that, love is the thing that will bind us together. I think that's essential, and I think it's true.
I agree with both of those. I think those are really beautiful words. And I think the only thing I would add is that any pain that you are feeling at this moment is valid and it's important and it's a healthy and accurate response to living in a tumultuous time and to facing the world's woes. I take my students through some pretty intense and dark material looking at nuclear issues, and we do an exercise at the end of the semester that is inspired by the work of Joanna Macy called the Truth Mandala. And in that experience, we go through the emotions that arise in us, the fear, the anger, the anguish, the pain. And I think in our society, we pathologize anything other than happiness. So I guess if you're feeling pain and if you're having that response, it's a bellwether. It's showing you something, and trust it.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm so young. Excuse me a second.
What can we do today to foster peace and healing for Mother Earth?
And you.
So I'll just start with practical things that individuals might think about. And I know that many of you probably are already doing these things. Eat less meat. The carbon impact of meat and dairy is way more than driving cars. And just by eating less meat every week, we can reduce our carbon footprint. And I can go into all sorts of things about that. Plant a garden. Someone live in an apartment, find a sunny window spot, put some seeds in a pot and grow them. Whatever scale you are gardening at, you can create enough compost within your way of living to feed the plants that you grow, whether that's on 50 acres or on part of the apartment porch. By engaging in that cycle of life, and by nurturing and caring for others, we nurture that sense of compassion that we all need right now in a world where the pain is very real and omnipresent. Third practical thing, put a bucket in your shower so that the water that's cold before it gets warm goes somewhere other than down the drain. Sure, it's only a few gallons a week. The difference is by carrying that bucket of water out to the plants to water and care for them with it, we become more aware of the spiritual vitality of all the water that we produce every day. Put a pot under your kitchen sink so that the water that goes over your hands doesn't go down the drain. It can be used again. Again, we may not save gallons and gallons and gallons, and it won't fix the aquifer, but it will make you more conscious every day. If you're a part of a religious congregation, work with that congregation to create green space around the property of your house of worship. Work within your neighborhood to create shade and green space. And not just in your neighborhood, but the places that you immediately have access to. But advocate particularly to create green spaces in those parts of your town that, because of racism and oppression, do not have shade. And that contributes to negative property values and all that kind of stuff. So at a kind of neighborhood or congregational level, there is more leverage that we can do if we're aware of things again. And I would say finally, at the national level, read the farm bill and pay attention to what is in there, because the policy and the tax funding that goes into how our food arrives on our plates can change the world. And right now, we are spending a whole lot of money as a nation on things that actually don't work very well and are completely destructive of the environment. For example, if you look at a time-lapse satellite photo movie of the Northern Hemisphere, you will see through January, February, March, and April the carbon emissions at a fairly low level. When you hit May, everything starts to go red, and there's a whole bunch more carbon released into the atmosphere. Did everyone just get in their cars? No. What happens in May is we start tilling the soil. And tilling the soil throws carbon into the atmosphere. It throws topsoil into the wind. It literally creates dust storms. And just by switching the farm bill to emphasize no-till farming practices, we could double or triple our output while reducing carbon emissions. pay attention to what's in front of you and get involved, because collectively, as was mentioned, we're talking about millions of dollars that can actually change the world.
I've been trying to do this for 10 years now. Okay. And the one thing that I'm going to encourage with that is buy local when you can, because you can go, you can buy all the impossible burgers and incognito and all that. It is good living. It is not good living. So try your best with your diet if you really want to go plant-based to make as much stuff at home as you can. And also compost. That's a very important thing. Don't just throw your stuff away. It can be really good soil. Composting is a process though, so that doesn't apply to something. Just it's the little things that we do that can really go a long way, even if it doesn't seem impactful at the time.
I love the individual and practical suggestions. I think whatever that looks like for you and your lifestyle is something to cultivate. I had chickens for many years, and unfortunately I just lost 3 to a raccoon attack. But it was beautiful because it was a connection, a daily connection to more than human creature, and I felt connected to my ancestors who practiced farming through having chickens. It's a simple thing. But actually what I want to do is just give you all, in response to this question, is a book recommendation. There's a fantastic book that came out last year by Dr. Maria Gomez called Nuclear Mexico. And that book is a much needed text that kind of lays out the full history and also present and activist landscape around nuclear issues in New Mexico. I can't recommend it enough. There's a chapter in there about 2 contemporary issues. One is the potential transportation and storage of high-level nuclear waste in New Mexico. The private company Holtec is proposing that. And then there's another chapter about the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium, which are fighting for justice around being impacted by fallout from the Trinity site. And those are 2 issues that are temporary, that are happening right here in New Mexico, and if more people got involved, especially with the downwinders, their window is quickly closing to expand RECA, R-E-C-A, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, and they need folks to call Congress on their behalf. So those are some things to do today.
Thank you all for those beautifully practical and pragmatic answers, because as you're going to hear about shortly, that's what we do at IPL. So this is to Ryan, so I'll start with you and then I'll get that call. What do you see as the relationship between honoring ancestors' spirits and honoring the land upon which our ancestors created events, traumas, circumstances that leave us as their descendants? How we learn their forgiveness and our forgiveness?
That's a really wonderful question. I think that as a whole, people who come from lineages that have colonial oppressors need to become comfortable with that guilt. White guilt is something that needs to just be sat with and grappled with. And a lot of people who practice ancestral iterations who are white will sometimes literally just want to avoid ancestors. They'll think, well, I don't want to think about my ancestors from, 1600 onward. No, it's going way back. Stone Age. and it's like, you can't do that. The immediate ancestors acknowledging what they did and really grappling with it and really sitting with it is really how you handle that relationship to the land and to your ancestors. A really beautiful thing that a friend of mine does is he goes into his individual ancestry. When he looks into, he's very, very in depth with it. And you'll find the certain things in it done, you'll try to donate these certain causes that they might have inflicted on purpose. So he knows that he comes from a family that owns slaves, and he tries to donate to a lot of black-owned nonprofits and black businesses. There are very material things that we can do to make up for the harm of our ancestors. And while we may never gain their forgiveness from them, you may, in your endeavor to continue to atone for what they have done, maybe find forgiveness in the future. And so it's really just about doing the work and making sure that you are being as anti-racist as possible. Make sure that you are allowing yourself to unlearn the immediate white reactions of defensiveness when confronted with something that makes you uncomfortable, because for some reason the word racist is more offensive than being racist. So if somebody says, hey, that's racist, accept it, receive it, think about it, and work on it. And that's when you can really work on some of that ancestral trauma and our relationship to the land.
Well, thank you so much. I think we can all agree that was stunningly rich. And I'm noticing that the word climate change didn't really come up, and yet I think we talked about and captured so much of the deep roots and causes and ways we can go forward. So we've all joined me in thanking